The gun was already on the table when Isabella Romano walked into the room. She didn't scream. She couldn't speak. Her eldest brother Luca wouldn't meet her eyes. Marco, the youngest, stared at his shoes like they held salvation. And standing across from them, tall, dangerous, dressed in a black suit that cost more than her childhood home, was Alessandro De Luca. The man who owned half the city. The man whose name made grown men cross themselves. The man who was looking at her like she was the answer to a prayer he'd been whispering his entire life. Is this her? His voice was velvet over steel. Luca nodded. Just once. That's all it took to sell a sister. Hey beautiful souls. Welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome to a story that's about to break your heart and put it back together in ways you never saw coming. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Are you team love conquers all or team some lines should never be crossed? And if you haven't subscribed yet, do me a favor and hit that button right now, because trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. Now, let me tell you about Isabella Romano, a woman who thought family meant protection, who believed blood was thicker than betrayal. She was wrong. Isabella's hands trembled as Alessandro's dark eyes swept over her, not with lust, but with something far more dangerous. Recognition. Reverence. Like he'd been waiting for this moment since before time began. Leave us, he said, his gaze never leaving hers. Her brothers didn't hesitate. They didn't hug her goodbye. They didn't apologize. They just left. The door clicked shut with the finality of a coffin closing. She was alone with the devil himself. Do you know who I am? Alessandro asked, his voice quiet, almost gentle. Isabella's throat was dry. You're the man my brothers owe money to. I'm the man who owns you now. 5 words. 5 words that shattered her world. She took a step back. He didn't move. Didn't advance. Didn't threaten. He just stood there, watching her with eyes that held secrets she couldn't begin to understand, eyes that looked at her like she was holy, even as he spoke words that made her a possession. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. Neither did I. But the way he said it, raw, honest, almost broken, made her believe him. What Isabella didn't know, couldn't know, was that Alessandro De Luca had been in love with her for 7 years. That he'd seen her once at a charity gala when she was 19 and he was 25, back when he still believed monsters like him could dream of angels. She'd worn a white dress. She'd laughed at something her friend said. And in that moment, Alessandro's entire world had tilted on its axis. He'd watched her from across the room, memorizing the curve of her smile, the sound of her joy. Then he'd walked away, because men like him didn't touch women like her. Men covered in blood didn't get to hold hands with innocence. So he built his empire. He eliminated his enemies. He became the most feared man in the city. And every single night, he whispered her name into the darkness like a confession. Now she stood in his living room, delivered to him like an answered prayer wrapped in cruelty. He'd never planned this. Never wanted her this way. But fate had other ideas. Your brothers owed me $3 million, Alessandro said, his voice carefully controlled. They offered you as collateral. Isabella's knees nearly buckled. I'm not worth. You're worth everything. The words came out like violence, like truth, like a vow he'd been holding back for years. She stared at him, confused, terrified, searching his face for the monster everyone said he was. But all she saw was a man looking at her like she was the only light in his endless darkness. I won't hurt you, he said softly. I would burn this entire city to ash before I let anyone hurt you. You don't even know me. His jaw clenched. His hands flexed at his sides. And for just a moment, Isabella saw something flicker in his eyes, longing, grief, a love so vast it could swallow the world whole. "You're wrong about that, Isabella." He said her name like a prayer. Like a secret. Like he'd been practicing it in the mirror for years, waiting for permission to speak it aloud. She should have run. Should have fought. Should have screamed. But something in his voice held her frozen, something that whispered of protection instead of possession, of worship instead of ownership. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Alessandro took a slow breath, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I want you to be safe. I want you to choose your own life. I want." He stopped himself, shook his head. "It doesn't matter what I want." But it did matter. Isabella could feel it in the air between them, thick with unspoken truths, heavy with the weight of something she didn't yet understand. Behind Alessandro, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city he ruled. Rain began to streak down the glass, distorting the lights below into a watercolor of violence and beauty. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "Your brothers aren't coming back for you," Alessandro said, and there was an edge to his voice now, anger, not at her, but for her. "They made their choice. And what's yours?" Isabella asked, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. Alessandro's eyes met hers, and in them she saw the truth he'd been carrying alone for 7 years. Devotion. Obsession. A love so pure it had survived in the darkest soil imaginable. "My choice," he said slowly, "was made the first time I ever saw you." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. "What does that mean?" He stepped closer, just one step, but it felt like crossing a continent. "It means you were never collateral, Isabella. You were always the prize. And I've been waiting my entire life for the universe to give me permission to protect you." She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The room spun with the weight of his confession, with the impossibility of what he was saying. "You're insane," she whispered. "Probably." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, sad, beautiful, resigned. "But I'm also the only thing standing between you and the people who would destroy you for sport." Outside, lightning split the sky. Inside, Isabella Romano stood face to face with her future, a future written in blood and silk, in violence and devotion, in the dark eyes of a man who'd loved her from the shadows and would now die before letting those shadows touch her. She didn't know it yet, but Alessandro had already made his choice. He would give her freedom. He would give her safety. He would give her the world. He would never give her up. "What happens now?" Isabella asked, her voice small but steady. Alessandro's expression softened into something almost tender. "Now, you decide if you can trust the monster who's been worshipping you from afar, or if you'd rather take your chances with the ones who sold you like cattle." It wasn't a fair choice. It wasn't even a real choice. But it was the only one she had. And as Isabella looked into the eyes of Alessandro De Luca, the Mafia boss, the killer, the king, she saw something that terrified her more than his reputation ever could. She saw a man who would burn the world for her. A man who already had. What happened next changed everything. Alessandro led Isabella through his penthouse with the careful distance of a man afraid to shatter glass. Each room they passed whispered wealth and power, marble floors, original artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. But Isabella noticed what the luxury couldn't hide, the security cameras in every corner, the reinforced doors, the way Alessandro's hand never strayed far from the gun at his waist. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. "This will be your room," he said, opening a door to a suite larger than her entire apartment. Soft grays and whites, a bed that looked like a cloud, French doors leading to a private balcony. Beautiful. Expensive. And unmistakably a cage, no matter how gilded. Isabella stepped inside, her arms wrapped around herself. And where will you be? Across the hall. Alessandro remained in the doorway, as if crossing the threshold would break some sacred rule he'd set for himself. You'll have privacy. Freedom to move throughout the penthouse. Anything you need, just ask. What I need is to go home. Pain flickered across his face, brief but devastating. You don't have a home anymore. Your brothers made sure of that when they gambled it away 3 months ago. The words hit like a slap. What? The apartment where you've been living? They used it as collateral for a loan they never intended to repay. The landlord evicted you yesterday. Your belongings are already here, I had them moved this morning. Isabella's legs gave out. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the world tilting sideways. Her brothers hadn't just sold her. They'd erased her entire existence and handed her the ashes. Alessandro took one step forward, then stopped himself, his jaw clenched with the effort of restraint. I know what you think of me. What you've heard. But Isabella, her name on his lips again, reverent and raw. I swear on everything I am, you are safe here. Safer than you've ever been. Safe. She laughed, brittle and broken. I'm a prisoner. You're protected. He crouched down to her eye level, maintaining distance but demanding her attention. There's a difference. Do you know what your brothers were involved in? What kind of people were circling them, waiting for an opportunity? She didn't. She'd been kept in the dark, the naive little sister who taught second grade and believed family meant something. Alessandro's eyes held hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. The Valentino family wanted you. They were going to take you whether your brothers agreed or not. Victor Valentino had plans for you that would have. He stopped, his hands fisting at his sides. I made sure that never happened. By buying me first. By making sure no one else could touch you. The words came out like gravel, like violence barely contained. I paid your brother's debt. I erased their mistakes. And in return, I asked for the one thing I've wanted since the moment I first saw you. Isabella's heart hammered. When did you see me? Alessandro stood abruptly, turning toward the window as if he couldn't bear to face her while confessing his truth. 7 years ago. A charity gala at the Rothmore Hotel. You wore a white dress with small flowers embroidered on the sleeves. Your hair was shorter then, just past your shoulders. You were laughing with a redhead, your friend from college. The memory crashed over Isabella like a wave. That gala. She'd gone as a +1, completely out of her element, uncomfortable in borrowed heels. She remembered almost nothing about it except. There was a man, she whispered. Across the room. He was staring at me. Alessandro's shoulders tensed. I was 25. Newly crowned, freshly baptized in blood. I walked into that ballroom planning business, making connections. Then I saw you. He turned back to her, and the naked longing in his eyes stole her breath. You smiled, Isabella. At nothing, at everything. Like joy was your default setting. And I realized I'd never felt that. Never known what it was to be, light. So you've been watching me. The accusation trembled between them. From a distance. Always from a distance. Alessandro's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I made sure you were safe. That your neighborhood had protection. That the school where you taught never had trouble. I never approached you, never interfered in your life. Because men like me don't get to touch women like you. Then why now? Because the world stopped giving me a choice. Anguish bled through his words. Your brother's debts put a target on your back. If I hadn't claimed you, someone else would have. Someone who wouldn't. He stopped, jaw working. I'm a lot of terrible things, Isabella. But I've loved you since before I knew love was possible for someone like me. That has to count for something. Isabella stood on shaking legs, anger and confusion and something dangerously close to sympathy warring in her chest. You can't love someone you don't know. Watch me. The challenge hung in the air between them, not a threat, but a promise. The first 3 days passed in surreal suspension. Isabella explored her cage, testing boundaries she found didn't exist. Alessandro kept his distance, appearing only for carefully orchestrated meals where conversation felt like negotiating a minefield. He answered her questions about his world with careful honesty. He never touched her. Never pushed. Never demanded anything except her presence at dinner. It was driving her insane. On the 4th morning, Isabella woke to voices, angry, rapid Italian echoing from somewhere in the penthouse. She pulled on a robe and crept down the hallway, following the sound to Alessandro's study. The door was cracked open. Through it, she could see Alessandro behind his massive desk, facing 2 men she didn't recognize. But she recognized danger when she saw it. Disrespect to the family, one of them was saying, his voice oily and cruel. Taking the Romano girl without consulting the council. I don't answer to the council. Alessandro's voice was ice. And Isabella is under my protection. That's not negotiable. Everything is negotiable, De Luca. The second man leaned forward, and Isabella caught the glint of a gun at his hip. Victor Valentino is calling for a meeting. He wants to discuss sharing arrangements. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. There are no sharing arrangements. Alessandro stood slowly, and even from her hidden vantage point, Isabella could feel the threat radiating from him. Isabella Romano belongs to no one. She is mine to protect, and anyone who suggests otherwise can take it up with me personally. Careful, Alessandro. The oily voice again. You're making enemies over a woman. That's not wise. Then I'll be unwise. Alessandro walked around the desk, and the 2 men actually stepped back. Tell Valentino if he wants to discuss Isabella, he can bring his best men and see how that conversation ends. Now get out of my home. They left, but their parting looks promised this wasn't over. Isabella should have retreated to her room. Should have pretended she hadn't heard. But as Alessandro turned back to his desk, she saw him brace his hands against it, head bowed, shoulders rigid with tension. How long were you standing there? He asked without looking up. She stepped into the doorway. Long enough. Who's Victor Valentino? Alessandro's laugh was bitter. Someone who wants what's mine and doesn't care who he has to kill to get it. I'm not yours. Legally, you are. He finally looked at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes made him look younger, more human. I signed a contract with your brothers. In our world, that's binding. You're under my name, my protection, my ownership. Isabella finished, anger flaring hot and bright. Responsibility. He corrected gently. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Alessandro moved around the desk, closing the distance between them with predatory grace. But when he stopped, he was still 3 feet away, close enough to touch, far enough to prove he wouldn't. I know you hate this. Hate me. But Isabella, the truth is simple, I'm the only thing standing between you and men who would break you for sport. Victor Valentino doesn't want to protect you. He wants to own you. Actually own you, in every way that word implies. Isabella's stomach turned. And you're different? Yes. The word was absolute, non-negotiable. Because I've spent 7 years loving you from a distance, building an empire strong enough to keep you safe, and I would rather die than see you harmed. Can Valentino say the same? Before Isabella could respond, the window behind Alessandro exploded inward. Glass shattered like deadly rain. Alessandro moved on pure instinct, crossing the distance between them in a heartbeat, wrapping his body around hers, taking them both to the ground as bullets tore through the space where they'd been standing. Isabella's scream was swallowed by the chaos. More gunfire. Shouting. Alessandro's weight pressing her into the floor, one arm curved around her head, protecting her with his own body as the world erupted into violence. Then, silence. Alessandro pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face, eyes wild with fear she'd never expected to see. "Are you hurt? Isabella, are you hurt?" She couldn't speak. Could only shake her head. Relief crashed across his features. Then fury. He stood, pulling her up with him, and for the first time Isabella saw the monster everyone whispered about. His eyes were black ice. His jaw was set in lethal determination. Blood stained his shoulder where glass had cut through his shirt. "Stay here," he commanded, already moving toward the shattered window. "Alessandro." He spun back, and the look on his face stopped her heart. "They just tried to kill you in my home. In my home." His voice was quiet, deadly. "This means war." 4 of Alessandro's men burst into the study, guns drawn. "Boss, the shooters are gone." 2 cars, headed south. "Find them." Alessandro's voice could have frozen hell. "And when you do, bring them to me alive. I want to know exactly who sent them." As his men rushed out, Alessandro turned back to Isabella. The killer disappeared, replaced by the man who looked at her like she was holy. He crossed to her slowly, carefully, like approaching something precious and fragile. "We need to move you," he said softly. "Somewhere safer." "Safer than a penthouse fortress?" Isabella's voice shook. "Safer than anywhere in the city." He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek, the first time he'd allowed himself that intimacy. "I have a safe house in the mountains. No one knows about it except my most trusted men. You'll go there tonight." "And you?" Alessandro's smile was all predator. "I'm going to remind this city why they fear my name. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what happens when they threaten what's mine." Isabella should have been terrified. Should have recoiled from the violence in his voice, the promise of bloodshed in his eyes. But instead, looking at this dangerous man who'd thrown himself over her body without hesitation, who was bleeding because he'd chosen to protect her instead of himself, she felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe monsters weren't born. Maybe they were made, forged by a world that demanded violence and then punished those who wielded it best. And maybe, just maybe, some monsters learned to love. "Take me to the safe house," Isabella whispered. "But Alessandro? Don't die. Because I'm starting to think I need answers only you can give." His eyes widened. Hope flickered across his face like dawn breaking. "I'll come back to you," he promised. "Even if I have to burn the whole city down to do it." Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, Isabella Romano stood in a room full of shattered glass and bullet holes, watching the man who loved her transform into the legend that would protect her. The war had begun. And Isabella was beginning to realize she didn't want to be saved from it. She wanted to survive it. With him. The safe house wasn't what Isabella expected. Nestled in the mountains 3 hours from the city, it looked like something from a fairy tale, stone and timber, surrounded by pine trees, with a view that stretched for miles. Beautiful. Isolated. And guarded by 6 of Alessandro's most lethal men, stationed at every entrance like silent sentinels. Alessandro had stayed behind to handle business. Isabella tried not to think about what that meant, tried not to imagine the violence he was orchestrating in her name. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw him covering her body with his, felt the phantom weight of his protection, heard the absolute conviction in his voice when he promised to come back. 3 days passed. No word. No contact. Just the quiet luxury of captivity and the suffocating weight of waiting. On the 4th night, headlights cut through the darkness. Isabella's heart lurched. She rushed to the window, watching as a black SUV pulled up to the house. The door opened, and Alessandro emerged, alive, whole, but moving with the careful deliberation of someone in pain. She met him at the door before she could stop herself. "You're hurt." The words tumbled out, her hands hovering over the bruises darkening his jaw, the cut above his eyebrow, the way he favored his left side. "I'm fine." But his eyes, God, his eyes were drinking her in like a man seeing salvation after wandering the desert. "You're safe. That's all that matters." "What happened?" Alessandro's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Victor Valentino learned what happens when he threatens my family. The council learned where my boundaries are. And this city learned that Isabella Romano is untouchable." He said it with such finality, such absolute certainty, that Isabella felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Not quite trust. Not yet love. But something closer to understanding. "Come inside," she said softly. "Let me look at those injuries." Alessandro followed her like a man in a trance. In the kitchen, under the warm light, Isabella gathered first aid supplies while he sat at the table, watching her every movement with an intensity that made her skin burn. "This will sting," she warned, dabbing antiseptic on the cut above his eye. He didn't flinch. Didn't move. Just kept staring at her like she was performing a miracle instead of basic wound care. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because for 7 years, I've imagined what it would feel like to have you close. To have you touch me without fear." His voice was rough, honest. "The reality is so much better than the dream." Her hand trembled. "Alessandro. I killed 3 men tonight, Isabella." The confession was brutal, unflinching. "Men who were planning to take you from me. I should feel guilty. I should feel something other than satisfaction. But all I feel is relief that you're here, safe, looking at me like maybe I'm not completely irredeemable." Isabella set down the antiseptic, her heart racing. "You're not irredeemable. You're just complicated. I'm a monster who's in love with an angel." He caught her wrist gently, his thumb stroking over her pulse point. "That's not complicated. That's tragedy." "Then why does it feel like something else?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Alessandro stood slowly, still holding her wrist, his body now inches from hers. "What does it feel like to you?" Isabella couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Could only feel the heat of him, the magnetic pull that had been building since the moment she'd walked into that room and seen a gun on the table and a man looking at her like she'd hung the stars. "Like maybe monsters and angels aren't as different as we think," she whispered. Alessandro's control shattered. He pulled her close, not rough, but desperate, his forehead resting against hers, his breath ragged. "Tell me to stop. Tell me you don't feel this too, and I'll walk away. I'll give you freedom, money, a new life anywhere you want. Just say the word." Isabella's hands found his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palms. She should say the word. Should run from this dangerous man and his dangerous world and the dangerous feelings spiraling through her veins. But she'd never felt safer than when he'd covered her body with his. Never felt more seen than when he looked at her with 7 years of longing in his eyes. "What if I don't want you to stop?" The confession tore from her throat. Alessandro made a sound somewhere between a groan and a prayer. His hands cupped her face with a gentleness that contradicted every rumor about him. Then God help us both. He kissed her like a man drowning and she was air. Slow, reverent, devastating. Like he'd been practicing this moment in his mind for years and was determined to get it perfect. Isabella melted into him, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body remembering something her mind had forgotten, that she'd seen him 7 years ago too. That she'd wondered about the intense man across the ballroom before dismissing him as unreachable. Now he was kissing her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alessandro rested his forehead against hers again. I'm still not good for you. Probably not. Isabella smiled despite herself. But I'm starting to think I'm not as good as everyone believed. His laugh was surprised, delighted, real. Careful, Angel. Keep talking like that and I'll start thinking I have a chance. Maybe you do. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a haze of stolen moments and dangerous honesty. Alessandro stayed at the safe house, conducting business remotely while his men handled the cleanup in the city. He and Isabella fell into a rhythm, coffee in the mornings, walks through the pine forest, dinners where conversation ranged from childhood memories to philosophy to the weight of the crowns they never asked to wear. He told her about his father's empire, about the violence that had shaped him, about the first man he'd killed at 17 and the nightmares that still haunted him. She told him about teaching second graders, about the family that had betrayed her, about the dreams she'd abandoned when survival became her only goal. They were learning each other. Slowly. Carefully. Like archaeologists excavating something precious and fragile. And every night, Alessandro kissed her goodnight at her bedroom door and walked away, even though the hunger in his eyes said staying was what he wanted most. Why won't you stay? Isabella asked one night, her hand fisted in his shirt, her body pressed against his in the hallway outside her room. Because when I finally have you, it won't be because you're grateful or confused or caught up in proximity. His voice was strained, his restraint hanging by a thread. It'll be because you've chosen me. Completely. With full knowledge of who and what I am. I already know who you are. No, Angel. You don't. Pain flickered across his features. Not yet. The next morning, everything changed. Isabella woke to shouting. She threw on clothes and ran downstairs to find Alessandro in the living room, his face ashen, a phone crushed in his white-knuckled grip. What happened? She demanded. He looked at her, and the devastation in his eyes stopped her heart. Your brother Luca is dead. Marco is missing. The world tilted. What? Valentino's men took them both last night. They killed Luca and left his body as a message. Marco, Alessandro's jaw clenched. They're using him as bait. They want a trade. A trade for what? The silence stretched too long. Too heavy. Alessandro. A trade for what? You. The word fell like an axe. They want you in exchange for Marco's life. They've given me 24 hours to decide. Isabella's legs gave out. She sank onto the couch, her mind spinning. Luca was dead. Her oldest brother, the one who taught her to ride a bike, who'd walked her to school, who'd sold her like cattle, was dead. And Marco, the baby of the family, was in the hands of monsters. There's no decision to make, she said quietly. You have to trade me. No. Alessandro's voice was absolute. He's my brother. He sold you. The words exploded from Alessandro, raw and furious. He and Luca gambled away your future, your home, your life, and when the bill came due, they handed you over without a second thought. I'm supposed to let you walk into Victor Valentino's hands to save the man who betrayed you. He's still my family. I'm your family now. Alessandro roared, then stopped, breathing hard, visibly pulling himself together. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less intense. You want the truth, Isabella? The whole truth? Fine. Here it is. He crossed to her, dropped to his knees in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. Your brothers didn't just owe me money. They were working for Valentino. They were feeding him information about my operations, my routes, my weaknesses. For 6 months, they played both sides, and when Valentino demanded payment, they offered him the one thing they knew I'd pay anything for. You. Isabella shook her head. No. That's not. Luca told me himself, that night he brought you to me. He said, we know you've been watching her. Here's your chance. Alessandro's hands gripped her knees, desperate for her to understand. They knew, Isabella. They knew I'd been protecting you from the shadows. They weaponized my feelings for you to save their own skins. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. You're lying. I wish I was. He pulled out his phone, pressed a button. Luca's voice filled the room, recorded, damning, confirming every word Alessandro had said. Her brother's voice, casual and cruel, negotiating her life like a business transaction. Isabella couldn't breathe. Couldn't process. The family she'd defended, the brothers she'd loved despite everything, they'd known. They'd used her. They'd sold her to the one man who would never refuse because they'd figured out his secret. I'm sorry, Alessandro whispered, his thumb stroking her knees in helpless comfort. I'm so sorry you had to hear that. But I need you to understand why I can't, why I won't, let Valentino have you. Not to save Marco. Not to save anyone. You're the only good thing in my entire blood-soaked life, and I will burn this world to ash before I let them touch you. Isabella looked at this man, this killer, this king, this complicated disaster of a human being who'd loved her from afar and was now on his knees before her, offering her a protection her own family had never given. And she made her choice. Then we save Marco together, she said firmly. Not by trading me. By being smarter than Valentino thinks we are. You've spent 7 years protecting me from the shadows, Alessandro. Teach me to protect myself in the light. Hope blazed across his face. Isabella. I'm done being the prize, she interrupted. I'm done being the thing men fight over. If I'm going to survive your world, I need to learn how to fight in it. With you. Not behind you. Alessandro searched her eyes, looking for doubt, for fear. He found only steel wrapped in grace, determination wrapped in gentleness. You're sure? I'm terrified, she admitted. But I'm also done running from who I'm becoming. So teach me. And then we'll get my brother back and make Victor Valentino regret the day he heard my name. Alessandro stood, pulling her up with him, his hands framing her face. You're incredible. You know that? I'm learning from the best. She smiled, sad and fierce and real. He kissed her then, not gentle, not careful, but claiming and desperate and full of a promise that tasted like forever. When they broke apart, Alessandro's eyes were blazing. Okay, Angel. You want to learn to fight? I'll teach you. But when this is over, when Valentino is dealt with and Marco is safe. Yes. Isabella breathed. You're mine. Completely. By your choice, not circumstance. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of it. Deal. Outside, storm clouds gathered. Inside, a Mafia king and the woman he loved planned a war that would reshape the entire city. The game had changed. Isabella wasn't the prize anymore. She was the queen. Alessandro taught Isabella everything. How to shoot, her hands steady on a Glock 19, the recoil becoming familiar instead of frightening. How to read people, the tells that revealed lies, the body language that betrayed intentions. How his world worked, the alliances built on fear, the respect earned through calculated violence, the delicate balance between power and paranoia. But most importantly, he taught her that survival in his world required something she already possessed, the ability to see the humanity in monsters and the monstrosity in humans. Valentino will expect me to either trade you or attack directly, Alessandro explained, maps of the city spread across the dining table. He's positioned men at 3 locations where Marco could be held. Classic shell game, we pick wrong, Marco dies. So we don't pick, Isabella said, studying the maps with the analytical mind that had made her a good teacher. We make him come to us. Alessandro's smile was proud and predatory. Exactly. We set a trap he can't resist. The plan was dangerous. Insane. It required Isabella to be bait, visible, vulnerable, too tempting for Valentino to ignore. They would leak her location, make it seem like Alessandro had sent her away unprotected, and when Valentino's men came for her, they'd lead Alessandro's team directly to Marco. I don't like you being exposed, Alessandro admitted the night before the operation, his arms wrapped around her on the couch, his chin resting on her head. I trust you to keep me safe, Isabella whispered. The way you've been doing for 7 years. His arms tightened. If anything goes wrong. It won't. Isabella. He turned her to face him, his eyes burning with intensity. If it does, if they get past my men and take you, I need you to know something. Don't. She pressed her fingers to his lips. Don't say goodbye. Say, see you soon. Alessandro kissed her fingers, then her palm, then pulled her close and kissed her like the world was ending and she was the last beautiful thing in it. See you soon, angel. And when this is over, I'm going to marry you. Make you my wife in every way that matters. Give you the life you deserve. I don't want the life I deserve, Isabella said against his mouth. I want the life I choose. With you. The next day, everything went to hell. Isabella was positioned at a hotel downtown, visible through the windows, apparently alone. Alessandro's men were hidden throughout the building, in surrounding structures, ready to follow when Valentino's team made their move. They didn't have to wait long. 3 black vans pulled up at 3 p.m. 8 men exited, moving with military precision toward the hotel entrance. Isabella's heart hammered, but she stayed in position, letting them see her, letting them think she was trapped. Then everything deviated from the plan. One of Alessandro's men, a guard named Cole who'd been with him for 5 years, suddenly turned his gun on his own team. The betrayal was swift, brutal, and perfectly timed. 2 of Alessandro's soldiers went down before anyone could react. We have a traitor. The shout crackled through Isabella's earpiece. Code red. Abort. But it was too late. Valentino's men were already in the building, and with Cole's help, they knew exactly where Isabella was hidden. The door burst open. Isabella grabbed the gun Alessandro had given her, but there were too many of them. A hand seized her wrist, twisting until the weapon clattered to the floor. A cloth pressed over her mouth and nose, chemical sweet, suffocating. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was Alessandro's voice screaming her name through the earpiece. Isabella woke in a warehouse. Cold. Dark. The smell of rust and old blood thick in the air. Her hands were bound to a chair, her head pounding from whatever they'd used to knock her out. Across from her, beaten and bloodied but alive, was Marco. Bella, he croaked, his face a mess of bruises. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed. A man emerged from the shadows, tall, silver-haired, with eyes like a snake. Victor Valentino. The famous Isabella Romano, he said, his voice smooth as poison. Alessandro's obsession. Do you know how long I've waited to meet you? Where is he? Isabella demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Alessandro? Oh, he's coming. That's the beauty of this. Valentino circled her like a predator. Your knight in blood-stained armor is racing here right now, probably tearing the city apart looking for you. And when he arrives, he'll walk right into an ambush that will end the De Luca Empire once and for all. Isabella's blood ran cold. This was never about me. Oh, it's absolutely about you. You're the key to everything. Alessandro De Luca, the man who's untouchable, unstoppable, who's built an empire on fear and loyalty, has one weakness. You. Valentino leaned close, his breath hot on her face. And I'm going to use that weakness to destroy him. Then I'm going to keep you as a reminder of how even kings fall. He'll kill you, Isabella said with absolute certainty. Valentino laughed. He'll try. But he'll be too late. By the time he gets here, half his organization will be dead, his allies will have turned, and the council will have named me the new king. All because he loved you too much to think clearly. Terror clawed at Isabella's chest, not for herself, but for Alessandro. He was walking into a massacre, blinded by the need to save her. She had to warn him. Had to find a way. What Valentino didn't know, what no one except Alessandro's inner circle knew, was that Isabella wasn't just some helpless teacher anymore. She'd spent 2 weeks learning from the most dangerous man in the city. And Alessandro had taught her one critical lesson: always have a backup plan. The earpiece they'd given her for the operation had seemed destroyed when Valentino's men took her. But Alessandro had insisted on a redundancy, a second, smaller device, hidden in her bra, activated by pressure. During the struggle, when they'd grabbed her, she'd triggered it. Alessandro had heard everything. Now, as Valentino monologued about his victory, Isabella kept him talking, buying time, feeding Alessandro information through her responses. So Cole was yours from the beginning, she said, keeping her voice scared, defeated. How long have you had a man inside Alessandro's organization? 2 years, Valentino admitted proudly. Long enough to learn every safe house, every route, every contingency plan. Your boyfriend is predictable when it comes to you, Isabella. Love makes men stupid. Then you don't understand love at all, Isabella said quietly. Because Alessandro's love for me isn't a weakness. It's what makes him unstoppable. Valentino's smile faltered. Big words for a woman tied to a chair. Are they? Isabella met his eyes with steel in her own. You think he'll come alone? You think he hasn't planned for betrayal? You've spent 2 years watching him, but you've never understood him. Alessandro doesn't just love me. He's built his entire empire on the principle of protecting what matters. And the moment you took me, you didn't just make an enemy. You made a purpose. Uncertainty flickered across Valentino's face. You're bluffing. Am I? Isabella smiled, and it was all teeth. Then why are your men checking their phones? Why do you keep looking at the door? Because Alessandro's counterattack had already begun. Outside the warehouse, the carefully laid ambush was crumbling. Alessandro hadn't come raging in blindly, he'd called in every favor, activated every alliance, and unleashed a coordinated strike across the city. Valentino's warehouses were burning. His bank accounts were frozen. His allies were receiving evidence of his planned betrayal, turning them against him faster than he could contain the damage. And Alessandro himself was coming. Not alone. Not reckless. But with the focused fury of a man who'd finally found his purpose and would let nothing stand in his way. The warehouse doors exploded inward. Valentino's men opened fire, but they were shooting at shadows. Alessandro's team moved like ghosts, trained, coordinated, lethal. The gunfight was brutal and brief. Then Alessandro walked through the smoke and chaos like an avenging angel dressed in black. Blood spattered his face. His eyes found Isabella, and the relief that crashed across his features was devastating. "Get away from her," he said to Valentino, his voice quiet, deadly. Valentino grabbed Isabella, a knife suddenly at her throat. "One more step and she dies." Alessandro stopped. For a moment, the whole world held its breath. Then Isabella spoke. "Do you remember what you taught me about fear, Alessandro?" His eyes met hers, understanding flashing between them. "That it's only useful if you let it control you," he said softly. Isabella smiled. "Exactly." She slammed her head backward into Valentino's nose. His grip loosened just enough. She twisted, using the self-defense moves Alessandro had drilled into her, creating space between her body and the knife. Alessandro moved like lightning. One shot. Clean. Precise. Valentino's gun hand shattered, the knife clattering away. Before Valentino could recover, Alessandro was on him, disarming, subduing, his forearm pressed against the older man's throat with enough pressure to promise death without delivering it yet. "You made a mistake," Alessandro said, his voice cold as winter. "You thought love was weakness. But my love for Isabella made me stronger, smarter, more dangerous than you could ever imagine. She's not my vulnerability. She's my reason for being unstoppable." He looked at Isabella, still bound to the chair but unbroken, fierce, alive. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she said. "But Marco." Alessandro's men were already freeing her brother, who sobbed with relief and shame and gratitude. Alessandro turned back to Valentino. "You're finished. Your empire is ashes. Your allies have turned. The council has already voted, unanimously, to strip your territory and redistribute it. You're done. So kill me," Valentino spat. "No." Alessandro smiled, and it was terrifying. "Death is too easy. You're going to live, broken and powerless, watching while I build something better on the ruins of everything you tried to destroy. And every day for the rest of your miserable life, you'll remember that you lost because you underestimated what love could make a man capable of." He released Valentino to his men, then crossed to Isabella, cutting her bonds with gentle hands that had just delivered violence with surgical precision. "You were incredible," he whispered, pulling her into his arms. "I learned from the best," Isabella said against his chest, her hands fisting in his shirt, holding him like an anchor in the storm. Around them, Alessandro's team secured the warehouse. Marco was being attended to by medics. The threat was neutralized. But Isabella only had eyes for the man holding her like she was his entire world. "Take me home," she whispered. "Anywhere," Alessandro promised. "Everywhere. For as long as you'll have me." "How about forever?" His kiss was her answer, fierce and tender, victorious and vulnerable, a promise written in the space between their hearts. The war was over. But their story? It was just beginning. The council meeting happened 3 days later. Isabella insisted on attending. "You don't have to do this," Alessandro said as they dressed in his penthouse, restored, repaired, transformed from a crime scene into a home. "The council can be brutal. So can I." Isabella adjusted the elegant black dress Alessandro had commissioned for her, armor disguised as fashion. "They need to see that I'm not some fragile possession. I'm choosing this life. Choosing you. They need to understand the difference." Alessandro's eyes darkened with pride and something hotter. "You're going to terrify them." "Good." She turned, and he was there, his hands settling on her waist, his forehead resting against hers. "We do this together, right?" "Together," he confirmed. "Always." The council chamber was everything Isabella expected: old money and older violence, 12 men who'd built empires on blood and expected deference. They looked at her like a curiosity, a weakness, proof that Alessandro De Luca had finally made a mistake. They were about to learn otherwise. "Gentlemen," Alessandro began, his hand resting possessively on the small of Isabella's back. "I've called this meeting to address the Valentino situation and to introduce you formally to Isabella Romano, my future wife." Murmurs rippled through the room. One man, Antonio Greco, old guard, traditional to his bones, spoke up. "With respect, Alessandro, bringing a woman to council business is the new reality," Isabella interrupted, her voice calm but commanding. "Because I'm not just Alessandro's wife-to-be. I'm the reason Victor Valentino's empire crumbled. I'm the person who identified the traitor in Alessandro's organization. And I'm the woman who's going to help reshape this council into something that doesn't treat human beings like currency." The room went silent. Antonio's face reddened. "You have no authority here." "She has mine," Alessandro said, his voice cutting like steel. "Which means she has all the authority that matters. Isabella survived an attempted kidnapping, fed us intelligence that saved lives, and proved herself more valuable in 2 weeks than some of you have been in 2 decades. If you have a problem with her presence, you have a problem with me." The challenge hung in the air, daring anyone to accept it. No one did. "Now," Alessandro continued, his tone shifting to business. "Valentino's territories are being redistributed. But there are conditions. We're implementing new rules: no human trafficking, no exploitation of civilians, no using family as collateral for debts. This organization operates on loyalty and respect, not fear and cruelty." "You're going soft," another council member muttered. "I'm going smart," Alessandro corrected. "The old ways are dying. Law enforcement is getting smarter, technology makes secrets harder to keep, and public tolerance for our existence depends on us having lines we don't cross. We adapt or we die. I'm choosing adaptation." He looked at each man in turn, his gaze absolute. "Anyone who disagrees is welcome to challenge me for leadership. Right here. Right now." No one moved. "Good." Alessandro's smile was sharp. "Then we're in agreement. The council operates under new leadership with new rules. And Isabella Romano has a voice at this table, whether you like it or not." Isabella stepped forward, addressing the council directly. "I know what you're thinking. That I'm naive. That I don't understand this world. But I've learned something these past weeks: power isn't just about fear. It's about knowing when to show mercy and when to show strength. Alessandro showed me that. And together, we're going to build something better than what came before." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You can work with us, or you can try to work against us. But I promise you, gentlemen, I'm much more dangerous as an enemy than as an ally. Because I have something none of you have: I have nothing to lose and everything to fight for." The meeting ended with grudging acceptance. As they left, Antonio approached Isabella, his expression calculating. "You're either very brave or very foolish, young lady." "I'm both," Isabella said simply. "And that's what makes me perfect for this life." Antonio laughed, surprised, genuine. "Alessandro, you might have actually found your match." "I know," Alessandro said, his arms sliding around Isabella's waist. "That's why I'm keeping her." Outside, in the car, Isabella finally let herself breathe. "You were magnificent," Alessandro said, kissing her temple. They didn't know what hit them. "I was terrified," Isabella admitted. "But you were right, fear is only useful if you let it control you." "You're going to be an incredible queen," Alessandro murmured. "My queen." Isabella turned to face him fully. "Then ask me properly." Alessandro's breath caught. Isabella. You said when this was over, you'd marry me. Well, it's over. Valentino's finished. The council's handled. Marco's in witness protection with a new identity and a chance to start over. So ask me, Alessandro. Ask me to marry you. Alessandro's hands were shaking as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, like he'd been carrying it for days, waiting for the right moment. I bought this 7 years ago, he admitted, opening it to reveal a stunning diamond ring, elegant and simple and perfect. The day after I first saw you. I knew even then, somehow, that you were my future. I've been carrying it ever since, hoping someday I'd be worthy of offering it to you. Tears pricked Isabella's eyes. Alessandro. Isabella Romano, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You are the light in my darkness, the reason I became better than what I was raised to be, the purpose behind every breath I take. I've loved you from a distance for 7 years, and I want to love you up close for 70 more. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my queen in every way that matters? Yes, Isabella breathed. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring on her finger, a perfect fit, like it had been made for her because it had, and kissed her with 7 years of longing finally finding its release. The wedding happened 6 months later. Small, intimate, nothing like the spectacle the council had expected. Just Alessandro's closest allies, a few of Isabella's friends from her teaching days, and Marco, clean, sober, rebuilding his life with the second chance his sister had given him. Isabella wore white, not for purity, but for new beginnings. Alessandro wore black, not for darkness, but for the strength that had kept her safe. When he saw her walking down the aisle of the small chapel, tears streamed down his face without shame. You're everything, he whispered when she reached him. Everything I never knew I needed. And you're everything I chose, Isabella whispered back. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. The vows they'd written were simple, honest, real. I vow to protect you, Alessandro said, his hands holding hers. Not because you're weak, but because you're precious. I vow to love you in the darkness and the light. I vow to build a life worthy of the woman you are. I vow to stand beside you, Isabella said, her voice strong and clear. Not behind you, not in front of you, but beside you. I vow to be your partner in every storm. I vow to love the man you are while helping you become the man you want to be. When they kissed as husband and wife, the chapel erupted in applause, even the hardened criminals in attendance moved by the impossible love story they'd witnessed. The reception was held at the safe house in the mountains, the place where they'd learned each other, where Isabella had transformed from captive to partner, where love had grown in the space between fear and trust. Happy? Alessandro asked as they danced, the reception winding down, stars bright overhead. Deliriously, Isabella said, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Though if you told me 6 months ago that I'd be married to a Mafia boss and genuinely happy about it, I'd have thought you were insane. Alessandro laughed, the sound rich and real and so different from the cold man who'd first claimed her. If you told me 7 years ago that the woman I loved from afar would actually choose me, would actually want this life, I'd have called you a liar. Life is strange, Isabella mused. Life is perfect, Alessandro corrected, spinning her gently. Because you're in it. Later, as the party continued inside, they slipped away to the balcony overlooking the forest. The moon was full, casting silver light over the mountains. I have something to tell you, Isabella said, nervous excitement in her voice. Alessandro turned to her, concern flickering. What is it? I'm going back to teaching, she said. Part-time. At a school in the city. I know it might complicate things, but... It's perfect, Alessandro interrupted, pulling her close. You should absolutely do it. Be yourself, Isabella. I fell in love with a teacher who believed in second chances and saw the good in everyone. Don't lose that because you married me. I'm also going to start a foundation, Isabella continued, confidence growing. For kids from broken families. Give them resources, counseling, opportunities. Fund it with some of the money we're making from the legitimate businesses. Alessandro's smile was blinding. See? This is exactly what I meant. You're making my empire better just by being part of it. Our empire, Isabella corrected. We're partners, remember? Partners, Alessandro agreed, kissing her softly. In everything. 1 year later. Isabella stood in the nursery of their penthouse, watching the sunrise paint the city gold. In her arms, their daughter slept, tiny, perfect, named Sofia after Alessandro's mother. You're going to have the strangest life, Isabella whispered to the baby. Your father is technically a crime lord. Your mother was technically sold to him by her brothers. But you're also going to have so much love, little one. So much protection. So much hope for a better world than the one we inherited. Arms circled her waist from behind. Alessandro's chin rested on her shoulder, his eyes on their daughter. She's perfect, he murmured. Like her mother. She's loved, Isabella corrected. Like her father finally let himself be. They stood there as the city woke up, the city Alessandro ruled with justice instead of just fear, the city where Isabella taught children and ran a foundation and proved every day that goodness could survive even in darkness. Do you ever regret it? Alessandro asked quietly. Choosing this life? Isabella turned in his arms, her free hand cupping his face. I regret nothing. My brother's betrayal led me to you. Your obsession became devotion. Our darkness found light. And now we have her. She glanced at Sofia. We have everything. We have everything, Alessandro echoed, kissing her forehead, then her lips, then the baby's head. And I'm going to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret giving a monster a chance to be a man. You were always a man, Alessandro, Isabella said softly. You just needed someone to see it. Outside, the city moved on, deals made, power shifted, the council navigated with Isabella's wisdom tempering Alessandro's strength. The Romano De Luca empire wasn't perfect. It would never be clean. But it was better. Fairer. More human. And at the center of it all was a love story that should have been tragedy but became triumph. A mafia boss who dreamed of an angel and a woman who'd learned that monsters were just men who'd never been loved properly. They'd found each other in darkness. They'd built a kingdom in twilight. And they'd create a future in the light. Together. Always.